What an avoidant's hoping for after you go no contact. We talk a lot about what you feel when you go no contact with someone who has an avoidant attachment style. The pain, the strength it takes, the moments of second guessing. But rarely do we stop and ask, what are they hoping for? Because avoidants may act like they don't care, but they do. They just care in a way that's deeply guarded. And when you go no contact, something happens that they secretly kind of hope for. They hope you still want them. They hope you're just teaching them a lesson, not actually gone. They hope you'll reach back out when they're finally ready. They hope you'll keep the door cracked open even though they were the ones who couldn't walk through it. Let me be clear, avoidants don't want you to move on. They just want the freedom to not show up without losing you. It's not necessarily malicious, it's fear of being engulfed, of not being enough, of being stuck in something they don't know how to handle emotionally. But that fear doesn't make them a safe partner. And when you go no contact, they start to realize you're not playing the game anymore. You're not waiting, you're not breadcrumbing hope, you're living. And that scares them more than closeness ever did. They hoped you'd wait, but now you're healing. And what they secretly feared the most, you're choosing yourself, is happening. So if you're wondering what they're hoping for after you go no contact, they're hoping the door stays open just long enough for them to still have control. But your job is to close it gently, lovingly, and finally, when someone with an avoidant attachment style disconnects, it can feel like they've shut the door without looking back. They may withdraw, go cold, or even act indifferent after the relationship ends. But underneath that surface, something much more complicated is going on. After you go no contact, what they're often secretly hoping for is that you'll still come back, but on their timeline. Not now, maybe not even soon, but eventually. This hope allows them to maintain a sense of control without confronting the discomfort of closeness or vulnerability. Avoidants struggle with emotional intimacy. The more connected they feel, the more their fear gets triggered. Closeness can feel overwhelming, like a trap they need to escape from, so they push people away. But that doesn't mean they want those people to disappear. What they really want is space and security. They want you at arm's length, available, but not too close. So when you go no contact, it threatens this delicate balance they've created. You're not texting, you're not checking in, you're not sending signals that you're still there in the background, waiting for them to be ready. And that unsettles them more than you might think. In their mind, the disconnection was meant to be temporary, or at least manageable. They might convince themselves that you just need some time to cool off, that you'll reach out eventually, and that they'll have the luxury of deciding what to do when that time comes. It's a form of passive control. They're hoping you'll carry the emotional burden for both of you, grieving, reflecting, maybe even changing, so that if they decide to come back, you're still there, ready to reconnect. That way, they never have to fully confront the cost of their emotional unavailability. This is why your silence after going no contact doesn't go unnoticed. It speaks a language they understand, unpredictability. Suddenly, you become the unknown variable, or no longer in their predictable orbit, and that unpredictability forces them to wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking, whether you're thinking about them at all. It breaks the pattern they were counting on, and it disrupts the emotional safety net they assumed they'd always have. So even if they don't reach out, even if they act like it doesn't matter, part of them is still watching, waiting, hoping. They want to believe the story isn't over, but they want it to restart on their terms, at a time when they feel ready, without pressure and without consequence. Avoidant individuals live in a complicated emotional paradox where they desperately crave space, but also fear losing the people they care about. When you go no contact, this paradox becomes painfully clear. They don't actually want you to move on and disappear from their lives. Instead, what they want is the freedom to have space without losing the connection entirely. This need for emotional distance is not about rejection, but about self-protection. Avoidants often feel overwhelmed by the intensity of closeness and intimacy, which can trigger feelings of vulnerability they aren't comfortable handling. So their instinct is to pull away, to create distance where they feel safe. But that safety only works if the relationship, or at least the potential for it, remains intact. This means that even though they push you away or retreat, they are quietly hoping the relationship is still there waiting for them, even if it's at a distance. They want you to be around, reachable, available, but not pressing for closeness or explanations. The idea is to keep the connection on their terms, where they control the amount of interaction and emotional investment. They want to avoid feeling trapped or overwhelmed, but they also don't want the finality of losing you completely. It's a balancing act that often leaves their partners confused, caught between feeling rejected and feeling needed. Going no contact disrupts this delicate balance because it removes the safety net they've come to rely on. It means you're no longer an option they can quietly count on. It means they have to confront the possibility that you might be moving on or healing without them. This triggers anxiety and fear because it threatens their sense of security. They might not express this openly, but inside, they're often hoping you're still holding space for them somewhere in your heart. They want to believe you haven't fully closed the door, even if you've stopped communicating. For avoidants, space and distance are a way to manage their own emotional overwhelm, not a statement about their feelings toward you. But because they rarely communicate this clearly, it can feel like rejection or disinterest to the other person. The truth is, they want to maintain a connection that doesn't demand too much of them emotionally, but still allows them to feel like they have someone who cares. When you go no contact, it challenges that dynamic, and they find themselves in a place of uncertainty they don't like. They want space, yes, but not at the cost of losing you entirely. When you decide to go no contact, especially with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, it's easy to assume your silence will just be met with relief or indifference. After all, they've shown signs of pulling away, shutting down, or keeping emotions at arm's length. But the truth is, your silence unsettles them more than you might realize. Avoidants thrive on predictability and control. When communication stops abruptly, it throws their carefully maintained emotional system off balance. Avoidants often use distance and withdrawal as a way to regulate their emotions and protect themselves from feeling overwhelmed. They prefer to keep things at a manageable level where they can control when and how much to engage. When you're responsive and present, even if from a distance, they know what to expect. They might not always like the closeness, but the rhythm of communication provides a certain safety net. It's predictable, it's manageable, and they can mentally prepare for it. Going no contact disrupts this pattern entirely. Suddenly, there's a void. No messages, no reactions, no breadcrumbs of attention. This silence is a foreign and uncomfortable territory for them. It forces them to sit with uncertainty and question what's happening. The lack of response removes their usual safety cues and leaves them wondering if you're angry, hurt, moving on, or just done. This uncertainty is anxiety-inducing because it takes away their ability to predict your behavior and control the emotional landscape. In many ways, your silence becomes louder than any words could be. It speaks volumes to them, not about what you're saying, but about what you're not saying. It signals a change in the dynamic they thought they understood. It communicates boundaries and limits they weren't expecting. This sudden unpredictability challenges the avoidance comfort zone, forcing them to confront feelings of loss, confusion, and sometimes fear. Their unsettled state often manifests as internal questioning. They may replay past interactions, wonder if they could have done something differently, or speculate about your feelings and intentions. Even if they don't reach out, their mind is actively working through the silence. This mental space can create a sense of longing or regret, but also fear that the relationship might really be ending, that they've lost the person who provided them with emotional availability on their terms. Ultimately, your silence strips away the emotional control they had been relying on. It puts them in a vulnerable position where they must face the reality that they can no longer predict or manage the connection as they once did. This is why your no contact period can be so powerful. Not because it forces a reaction, but because it unsettles the avoidant in a way that words often cannot. Avoidants often carry a deep fear of emotional closeness, but what's less obvious is that this fear is frequently matched or even outweighed by a fear of being forgotten or abandoned. This internal conflict creates a complex emotional landscape where they simultaneously push people away, yet worry about losing them entirely. When you go no contact, it brings this fear of being forgotten into sharp focus. The silence doesn't just represent distance, it feels like a threat to their existence in your life, which is something they find extremely unsettling. Their fear of closeness is about vulnerability and the potential for being overwhelmed or engulfed by emotions they don't feel equipped to handle. Intimacy demands openness and exposure, and avoidants are wired to avoid that discomfort. However, underneath that protective mechanism lies a very real concern that if they create too much distance, they will be erased from the other person's world forever. This tension between wanting to stay safe and wanting to be remembered often causes avoidants to oscillate between pushing away and pulling back in, which can be confusing to those around them. When you decide to go no contact, avoidants experience a unique kind of emotional challenge. Instead of the usual push-pull dynamic where they can control the distance, the silence forces them to face the possibility that you might not come back. It strips away their ability to maintain a connection on their own terms and leaves them with the painful prospect that the relationship might end completely. The fear of being forgotten becomes much more real and intense because the usual cues that you're still there have disappeared. This fear can lead to mixed internal reactions. On the hand, they may try to convince themselves that no contact means you've moved on and that it's safer to emotionally detach and move on themselves. On the other hand, they might cling to the hope that you're still thinking about them, waiting for the right moment to reconnect. This ambivalence is often invisible but very powerful, causing them to wrestle with their feelings in silence. In many cases, this fear of being forgotten also manifests as a deep longing. They might replay memories, wonder what they lost, or question if they made a mistake. Even if they don't reach out, this internal emotional turmoil can be a sign that the fear of losing you completely is very real. It's a reminder that avoidants, despite their distance, do care deeply, but their way of expressing that care is often hidden behind walls built to protect themselves from vulnerability. When you begin to truly heal after going no contact, you shift the dynamic in a way that avoidants are often unprepared for. They were used to you being emotionally available, always there to talk things through, reach out, or keep the connection alive, even if it was one-sided. But when you stop showing up in those ways and start pouring that energy back into yourself, it disrupts the emotional rhythm they had grown comfortable with. Whether consciously or not, they had counted on you staying stuck in the same emotional cycle with them. Your healing is not just your personal growth, it's a quiet revolution that changes everything. Avoidants are drawn to relationships where the other person takes the lead in emotional labor. It allows them to maintain control without needing to confront their own vulnerability. As long as you are holding space for them, keeping the connection alive and trying to make it work, They don't feel the urgency to change. But when you begin to detach and actually start to thrive, not just pretend, but genuinely move forward, they sense that shift and it can deeply unsettle them. Your healing represents something powerful. Closure that doesn't require their participation. It means they no longer get to be the center of your emotional world. And that's something many avoidants quietly depend on. They may have pushed you away, but they still found comfort in knowing they mattered enough for you to keep trying, watching you reclaiming your energy. Set boundaries and grow without them forces them to confront the consequences of their emotional distance. In some cases, this is when avoidants start to feel regret or curiosity. Not necessarily because they want to be close again, but because they're wondering how they lost the emotional control they once had. Your healing changes the narrative. From one where they were the person being chased or forgiven to one where they are no longer even included. That kind of change is jarring for someone who is used to feeling emotionally safe by keeping others at a distance. They didn't expect you to actually let go. They thought time and silence would soften your stance, not harden your boundaries. But healing means you're no longer willing to negotiate with confusion. You're choosing clarity, peace, and self-respect over potential. That's what truly threatens the avoidant. Losing someone who finally stopped waiting, stopped explaining, and most of all, stopped needing them to change. And that shift is far more impactful than any confrontation could ever be. So what is an avoidant hoping for after you go no contact? They're hoping you still want them, but not enough to require anything from them. They're hoping you'll stay in limbo, emotionally available, but distant enough not to trigger their fears. They're hoping they can re-enter your life without facing the cost of what their distance caused. But here's the truth. When you go no contact, not as a manipulation, but as a boundary, you're not waiting anymore. You're not hoping they'll change. You're changing. You're choosing peace over potential, clarity over confusion, and self-respect over crumbs of connection. And while they might hope the door stays open, you get to decide whether it ever opens again. That's not cruel. That's power rooted in healing. So if you've chosen to walk away from someone who couldn't meet you in the middle, take heart in this. You didn't lose something. You freed yourself. Thank you so much for being here, for listening with your whole heart, and for choosing growth, even when it's painful. If this message resonated with you, let it be a gentle reminder that walking away doesn't mean you've stopped loving them. It means you finally started loving yourself. Take care of your heart, honor your healing, and never apologize for choosing peace. Thank you, and goodbye for now.